Good afternoon,
Yes.
everyone. My name is Denise, and I'm sitting in my office in Ubi Road 1 in Singapore. And Helle, the lovely author whom we're here to celebrate, is sitting in her very calm and slightly dark writing room, all the way in Zurich, Switzerland. It's so wonderful to be here, and I would like to thank the Singapore Book Council for putting the Asian Festival of Children's Content book launches together. We're online this year and we're missing out on the opportunity of a big, giant physical reunion, but it's so great to be online because we have people from England and Helle's sister joining us from, is she in Denmark, Helle?
Yeah.
All the way from Denmark and England joining us today. So if you're joining us from overseas, thank you for waking up either really early or staying up really late. Um, we hope you'll enjoy the session today. Before we begin, there are some housekeeping things. We can't see you, but we'd still love to hear from you. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you click Q&A, you'll be able to pose questions to Helle and me, if you like, and we'll address the questions at the end of the session. There's also a chat button, so you can chat with the other attendees and also us. So there are many ways to reach us. If we don't get to your questions today, Helle is very active on social media. She's on Instagram and Twitter as HS Norup, N-O-U-R-P. So you're very welcome to chat with her there too. So we'll begin. In the 2018 edition of the AFCC, I had the amazing pleasure of introducing Helle at the launch of her debut novel, The Missing Barbie Ghazi. And today, it's a bit over 2 years later, and I'm so pleased to be back at the AFCC virtually so that we can celebrate Helle's launch of her second novel, The Hungry Ghost. The Hungry Ghost is published by Pushkin Press under the care of the inimitable editor Sarah Odendina. It has already received heaps of praise from illustrious authors such as Eloise Williams, Sinead O'Hart, and Joe Cotterill, who described The Hungry Ghost as evocative, gripping, beautifully constructed and expressed. And she also said that The Hungry Ghost reminded her of Catherine Rundell. This is amazingly high praise. It's from Joe Cotterill, who's one of my favorite authors, saying that Helle's story reminds her of the writing of Catherine Rundell, who's another one of my favorite authors. So I guess now by default, Helle also has to be one of my favorite authors. Helle's stories are beautifully constructed, as Joe Cotterill says, because she is so intricate in her world building. And today she's just going to give us a sneak peek into what went into The Hungry Ghost. So please, we'll pretend that we can hear you cheering and clapping and being really happy for Helle. And I'll let Helle begin.
Thank you so much, Denise. I'll be sharing my screen now, and you should all be able to see the presentation and then also see me and Denise on one side, and you can slide a little bit across if you need the screen to be bigger. But again, thank you much for those kind words, Denise. And thank you everyone for coming, whether you're up early or you're in Singapore. In the following, let me talk a little bit about the book, talk about my inspiration for the book. Then I'll do a short reading before we head back and answer some questions and discussion. So the book, in short, is about a girl called Freja. She's 12 years old, and it's about someone else called Ling, who you will discover a little bit more about. And the story starts when Freja is forced to move to Singapore to live with her dad and his new family. It's the beginning of the Hungry Ghost Festival month, as I'm sure you could guess from the title. And Freja is having trouble fitting in with his dad and with her dad and his new family, and kind of getting adjusted to living in Singapore, which is very different for her. the very first night she sees a mysterious girl in the garden, and a few days later she follows her to an old graveyard, and that graveyard is Bukit Brown Cemetery. For her it's such a mystery to find out who this girl is, and as we get a little bit further along in the story, it's discovered that the girl doesn't even know herself who she is. So this adventure starts then, and Freja must unravel old family mysteries. She must uncover these long buried secrets in a race against time and the end of the Hungry Ghost Festival month. In terms of kind of overall the story, it is an adventure story. It's an adventure story for, let's say, from 9 years and up. And at the heart is a mystery that needs to be solved, and it's built up like a mystery with clues and so on. The story takes place in contemporary Singapore and also in historical Singapore. And I'm going to talk more about the historical elements later, because that was some of the parts of the book that took most work to research, obviously. There is also a fantasy world built into the story, and that world is built on Chinese mythology and different elements from Southeast Asian folklore. In terms of themes, this is a story about families in distress. It's about grief and acceptance, but it's also about friendship, and it's a hopeful story, I would say, about new beginnings as well. So let me tell you about how everything began for this story. So if you look on the left-hand side, you can see some of these offerings that are for the hungry ghosts. And I really like to walk when I'm in a new place. I like to discover a place by walking around. And when we first moved to Singapore, I really walked a lot. And early on, I discovered offerings. And then, of course, when the Hungry Ghost Festival months began, there were offerings everywhere. And they intrigued me, and I tried to find out more about this festival and about the hungry ghosts. And I think it's such an interesting festival also, because there are these, first of all, these wandering spirits. It's a little bit scary, but also this whole aspect of remembering ancestors and remembering those we have lost is what fascinated me. If you then look on the right-hand side, I have some photos from Bukit Brown Cemetery, and also from the Hungry Ghost Festival month in Bukit Brown Cemetery. And I had heard about Bukit Brown Cemetery quite early on. I think my husband came home one day and said, oh, this wife of a colleague has been up there. She walks her dog there, and she saw a black spitting cobra up there. And I was like, I just couldn't imagine what kind of place, a cemetery which was like this wild place. So already before my first visit, it had a kind of magical, mystical feel to it. And then when I went there the first time, I was definitely not disappointed, because it was even wilder and more overgrown than I could have imagined. And the cemetery hasn't been in use since 1973. And you can really see that in these many years since then, the rainforest has just taken over the place. And we live quite near Bukit Brown Cemetery, so it was a place I went often for just a short walk in the morning. And I also went there with some of the guides up there to go more exploring in this place. And it was a bit of an escape for me from the city, and that is also what it very much is for Freja in the book. So I think this whole kind of this magical rainforest place, and in the center you also see a photo from Bukit Brown Cemetery, and kind of seeing that opposed to the city and the center of Singapore. There's such a huge discrepancy, and that was something I really wanted to explore. And then also this with kind of how the rainforest has grown over everything and kind of is hiding the history of what's going on. And in a way, I think also the Singapore, all the new buildings are kind of somehow overpowering or overshadowing a lot of the older buildings in Singapore, in a way that the new kind of grows over the old, which I think is also another interesting aspect that I wanted to explore. Below you see this little text, the seed of the story, and that is from an email I wrote to Sarah Odedina, my editor, back in March 2017, when I had just begun working on this book. I had sent her The Missing Barbaghazi, and she was considering whether Pushkin was going to publish it, and she had written to me whether I was working on something else. And I actually started this story because AFCC in 2017 had planned a retreat, and in order to be eligible, you had to submit 10,000 words of a story that had Asian aspects, of course. I always wanted to write a Singaporean story, but this was then the story I chose to work on. And the stepmom issues are still there, the graveyards are still there. The excessive materialism is one of the things that I pulled back a little bit on in subsequent drafts, but it is one of the things. Excessive materialism is associated with possession by hungry ghosts, and that's why I had it in from the very start. So if we look back a little bit on where Freja came from and some of the other aspects of the story, then you can see on the left-hand side a photo of me as a scout on my way on probably one of my first summer camps. I think I'm 8 or 9 in this photo, and I was a scout from when I was 6 years old until I was at university. So I think my whole childhood was spent as a scout, and I loved all the different skills you learn as a scout, and that is also some of the skills I've taken into the book. So you can see the Morse alphabet on the left-hand side, and this is kind of the memory aid that we had when I was learning the alphabet. It's of course with Danish words, so it doesn't really work in English, but at least the B is the same. So a bear with 3 bear cubs, and that was how we learned that it was a dash and 3 dots. And I still remember most of the letters. And Morse codes play a big role in the story as well. Then all the kind of knots and things you had to do, I love doing those. Freja does that quite a bit in the book as well. Maps and compasses and the whole orienteering side of being a scout is something I've always loved as well, and I still really love maps, all the new maps, and we have loads of maps around the house, and I really like looking at them. So as you can see, I'm also still a nature lover and a hiker. And I think it's funny, I found this photo where I'm standing in almost the same pose as when I was 8 or 9 years old. And I went on these hikes in Bukit Brown Cemetery, and there's a wonderful group of volunteers. I think they call themselves the Bukit Brown Brownies, that offer free tours. At the moment, I think they're on hold because of COVID, but otherwise these tours are absolutely amazing. And the photo on the right hand side is from one of the first guided tours I went on, and this was a 3-hour hike into the very oldest part of the cemetery, very far from everything, where I saw some quite interesting things. I mean, and monkeys and wild dogs, and there are very many interesting things to discover if you head into the distance on the cemetery. So I think these were really 2 of the pillars that the story is built around. Then, of course, there are a lot of other experiences and things that I sought out to build this story on. If you look at the left-hand side, there's a photo, and I don't know how well you can see it depending on how big the presentation is on your screen, but there's an old or elderly woman who's lighting just paper for hungry ghosts on one of the sidewalks. And I knew in this story I had to have a grandmother, an amma, who could inform Freja of some of the things that she needed to know about the hungry ghosts. And this was really the image I built this person up around. Then of course there's food. I mean, it's a hungry ghost. There has to be food in the story that has the word hungry in the title. And there is quite a bit of food. And one of the things that's in there is frog porridge, which is something Freja of course loves, and I like it, I have to say. Then I found it very fascinated with all the different kimsua, so the paper effigies, the different types of just paper that are being burnt for the hungry ghosts. And in the center photo on the left-hand side, you can see there's actually a laptop computer made of cardboard and paper that you can offer for a ghost. And I think this one costs like $3 or $3.50 or something like that. So it is possible to get something like that very cheaply. And then Haupthavila, and those of you who are in Singapore will know Haupthavila. It's a fascinating place with thousands of statues and displays of all kinds of mythical creatures and lots of tigers and dragons and so on. And there's also this, which is the entrance to the 10 courts of hell. And I knew I wanted some kind of fantasy world to be part of the story. And I did play around with using the 10 courts of hell as inspiration, but I simply found it too scary for a children's book and too scary for me to write about. And I think, Denise, you would have been too scared to read it as well, right? So I said, no, I need something nicer. And I think I explored different ideas. And again, I think nature was the answer. And the fantasy world is very much inspired by the big photo on the right-hand side, which is the view from the highest point on Pulau Ubin. And as you can see, it's just rainforest, and of course there's the water in front. But if you discard there's some buildings in the distance in Malaysia, but if you discard that, it's just a view over rainforest, and it's kind of very primal and looks like it doesn't belong in the real world. And that was really my inspiration. And then I also needed some interesting things to happen in this place, and these 4 ancient mythical creatures from China, which are also really some of the original bases for Feng Shui and so on, came in very handy. And I don't think I'm revealing too much, since they are also, I mean, the dragon and the vermilion bird are both displayed on the cover. So the most difficult part, as I think I mentioned before, was the whole historical details, getting them right. I mean, writing the book was also difficult, and getting the plot sorted was also difficult. But in terms of research, I think historical facts are very, very difficult to get right. And if you're writing a book that has fantasy in it, then that makes it even more necessary for the real world setting to be correct in a way. Because if you mess up something on the historical details, you lose the reader, and it's more difficult to suspend disbelief for the reader also when it comes to the fantasy world. And I think that the key thing I found was that, I mean, you need to really go through a lot of stuff in order to find the details that will matter to the story. And I searched for a while, and the photo in the center, which is of an ama, a domestic worker from China with a European child, was one of the things that when I found that, I knew I had something that is connected to the ghost's backstory. And this photo is from this very big book here called Singapore Biography, which is really an amazing nonfiction book about Singapore's history. And a lot of the backstory, as I said, fell into place when I saw that photo. Then on the left-hand side, there's a sign to the Porpoise section of Bukit Brown Cemetery, which also meant a lot for me early on. And it's even mentioned in the book, and it's even mentioned that Sarah Odedina and myself are walking past that, and are seen walking past that in the book. So we have a small cameo in the book. And we did that actually the day after the book launch. Denise talked about at the AFCC in 2018. I took Sarah on a walk of Bukit Brown Cemetery so she could see the setting and so on. And we got completely caught in the rain and were drenched afterwards. But it was a good meeting and a good chat for the book. Then further to the left, there's a photo from the Chinatown Heritage Center, which I also found very inspiring. It's a museum, and it has kind of rebuilt setting from how people lived in the, I would say, 1950s. So it's quite a lot later than the ghost's backstory. But it also has a lot of information about where the different groups of people that came from China to Singapore, where they lived, what they did in Singapore, and where they came from. So that's a really interesting place to visit as well. Then on the right-hand side, I have a photo of the reconstructed radio room of the Titanic. And that is something that also plays a little bit into the story, as you will see in a little while when I do my reading, because you can see, I don't know if you can read it, but the first kind of messages, these black boxes that contain the messages that were submitted by Morse signal from the Titanic, and on the first one it says CQD, this is Titanic, a lot of times, and on the second one they say CQD SOS, this is Titanic, we have struck an iceberg, and these are details that helped kind of date the backstory and were clues to be discovered in the story. Then at the bottom you see some newspaper clips, and I spent a lot of time on the National Library Board's site, because they have access to all the old newspapers and they are accessible online, not just on microfilm. So that meant I could also read them from home here in Switzerland, the ones that I needed to check up on. And I really read a lot of obituaries. It's a great way to learn things about people and what was going on. And I searched for a lot of specific things and found very interesting things, like this renaming of Macau Street to Upper Pickering Street, and the date for that, which is also something that I could use in one of the clues of the story. So these are really just a little bit of the work I did on the historical research. But I think a book is really a puzzle. So many things, both just impressions that I got from living in Singapore, from walking around in Singapore, from things that people said at specific times, and then also, of course, also things I sought out because I wanted to research them further. So many things played into the story, and on the left-hand side, these animals. I mean, the monkeys play a role in the story. The white tiger in Singapore Zoo is part of the story. All the little tortoises in Botanic Gardens are part of the story. And at the bottom, this lizard that's almost see-through, that was on my office window one day, actually gained quite a big role in the story that I couldn't have predicted when I took the photo. Then, of course, just the feel for walking around Chinatown, for instance, and here the Buddha Tooth Relic Temple. The view of container ships that look like Lego bricks in the water in the distance. And there's something about all the kind of weird and wonderful buildings around the Marina Bay area that played into the story. I went on the upper right-hand side, I went to a guitar show to get a feel for what that was, and that, of course, I could take into the story. I saw, and I don't know if you can see it, but the center photo on the right has a tiny monkey that has stolen some food, and this photo is from the school my children went to. And I saw this monkey one day just run down and steal something that someone had forgotten on one of the steps here. And then, of course, as I said, food plays a role. There's also a scene that takes place in a hawker center in Maxwell Hawker Center, so that of course also played into it. And then the dragon at the bottom is from Haw Villa. And I think, I mean, so many more impressions that I have taken from almost 4 years of living in Singapore just came into this mixer and became little puzzle pieces that I had to take out. And this was just a very mixed metaphor, but really building up a story from all of these impressions. And I think that is one of the wonderful things when you've been in a real setting as well, that you get these strong impressions and can also really feel the setting and not just describe what it looks like, but all the other sense impressions that you get when you are in the setting itself. So on to a bit of a reading, and here you can see a sign that has a big meaning in the book, and you can see Morse code letters that are written out in tiny sticks and pebbles with the letters C, Q, and D, which when Freja finds them doesn't mean anything to her. And the section I'm going to read, and I'm going to put on my glasses, is from chapter 11. Freja has been to the graveyard to Bukit Brown for the very first time. She followed this mysterious girl to a gravestone where she found the sign on the gravestone, and she copied it into her notebook and onto a piece of paper. And also these are Morse code letters. And now she's back home. Her dad has just returned from a business trip, and she's waiting in his office for him to finish a phone call. And in this scene, we also meet Clementine, who is Freja's stepmother. So one wall of his office is covered by a floor-to-ceiling bookcase. Between the boring law and business volumes is a shelf with books about Asia and Singapore. I read the titles. Singapore, a biography. A Life in the Colonies from Singapore to the West Indies, a history of modern Singapore. Then I pull out an A4-sized hardback called Singapore from the Air and sit down on the floor to flick through aerial photos of the island. A double page shows the McRitchie Reservoir Park with its sprawling reservoir lakes. On the next page, both Botanic Gardens and Bukit Brown can be seen. The cemetery is even bigger than the fancy gardens. As soon as Dad has finished talking, he comes over and gives me a big hug. I show him the aerial photo and tell him I've found the most amazing place. It's this wilderness right here in the middle of the city. You need hiking boots and a compass. Have you been up there? It's literally 5 minutes away. Dad shakes his head and sits back down at his desk, but I continue. I talk and talk because that keeps his gaze focused on me. I tell him everything about the graveyard, the lush greenness, the crumbling headstones, the overgrown path, how the rainforest has taken over the place. I tell him about everything except what brought me there in the first place, the girl. You have to come. Can we go tomorrow? Sure. I've taken the day off. First, though, we should get you your school uniform and books, and I need to drop this contract off at the office. I want to keep Dad talking, and I have an idea. Could we make a bonfire in the garden? A bonfire in the garden? He says, as if it's the most outrageous thing he's ever heard. As if we didn't used to make bonfires in the garden all the time before. Can we? Just a small one. Why on earth would you want a bonfire when it's so hot outside? So we can sit and watch the stars, I say, before I remember that the stars are invisible here. Or the flames. The laptop pings and Dad's eyes flick towards the screen. I have to answer this. Why don't we do it another night? Okay. My voice shakes, but he doesn't notice. Does CQD mean anything to you, Dad? I ask in a desperate attempt to keep his attention. Do you mean QED? That's Latin for when you've proven something mathematically. He's still looking at the screen. No, CQD, I say with emphasis on each letter. Clementine saunters into the office with a cup of tea for Dad. Do you need help, Freja? I shake my head. Then why did you say CQD? That means help? In Chinese? Not Chinese. Clementine chuckles. It's an old maritime distress signal from before SOS became the international standard. How do you know that? A distress signal makes sense. Since the first time I saw her, I've had a feeling the girl needed help. My father was a bit of an amateur radio enthusiast. He taught me SOS and CQD and always said that even though CQD has hardly been used since the Titanic sank, I ought to be familiar with both. She sighs. I miss him every single day. I'm staring at Clementine. It's like she's becoming a different person right before my eyes. An interesting person who knows useful things, not only how to plan a party and blow dye hair, but why didn't the girl write help or SOS? Why use a signal that hasn't been in use for the last 100 years? Why do you ask? I can't tell her I saw the letters in Bukit Brown because I want the graveyard to be something Dad and I can have to ourselves. Dad isn't even listening. His eyes are glued to the screen. Let's leave your daddy alone. Do you want a cup of tea, Freja? It's peppermint, nice and soothing. I follow her to the dining table, where she has her laptop set up next to a teapot and 2 cups. I'm doing my social media updates, she says while she pours me a cup. My newfound interest in her is gone again. Social media updates. It's so important for this party and the sponsors. Can you tell me how I pronounce this? I interrupt and unfold the sheet of paper. She glances at it before she answers. Ling rhymes with sing. Ling, I repeat. Is that a girl's name? It can be, she says. It also means spirit. Spirit. I shudder involuntarily. Are you okay, Freja? You look like you've seen a ghost. Yes, I'm really tired. Can I take my tea upstairs? Of course. She hands me the teacup. Sleep well. In a daze, I go up to my room. The teacup rattles on the saucer. Suddenly, it all makes sense. The way the girl moves and vanishes, her stamina, her clean white dress, that she appears at dusk or during the night, that she sent me a distress signal last used 100 years ago. Perhaps that's when she was alive. Staring out into the dark garden, I'm hoping to catch sight of the girl, the spirit, Ling. I'm not scared. She seems friendly, but I'm almost certain that she's some kind of spirit, a restless spirit who needs my help. So that was a little bit of a reading. I hope you enjoyed that and my Danish accent. So let me continue to last before we head to questions. This is a book launch. I need to thank some people, and I want to thank my family, both my husband and my sons, who are ever so patient with me when I'm lost in my own world, and my dad and my sister and my brother, who have been on many interesting nature things with me when I was a child, and everyone else in the family, the extended family. Then of course there's Sarah Odedina, my absolutely brilliant editor, Tilda Johnson, who did copy and line edits and is a joy to work with, and Anna Morrison, who has designed the absolutely beautiful cover. And the rest of the team at Pushkin Press, who have produced this beautiful book and also done a lot to promote it. Then there's Denise, and I have to say Denise has been instrumental to this book. She has been so enthusiastic about it from the very beginning and always ready to answer all my strange questions and discuss folklore and other things with me. And she was also very important in that she read the book to help me not make any cultural faux pas, and also to read through the Singlish part of the book and make sure that felt right and not like a Westerner trying to speak Singlish. And then of course all my friends in Singapore who heard a lot about the book, and my friends in SCBWI, both in Singapore and Switzerland, and my writers group in Singapore and Switzerland, who read early chapters of this book and have heard me talk about it a lot. And the Bucket Brown Brownies, who do these amazing tours of the cemetery. And then there are all the wonderful readers and teachers and librarians and book bloggers and reviewers, booksellers and children's authors who have been very enthusiastic about this book already and said very nice things about it and helped spread the word. And I'm really grateful to them. And I'm very grateful to all of you for coming today. And just before we go back to the discussion and the Q&A, as Denise said, you can find out more about me on my books, on my website, and also on Twitter and Instagram at HS Norup. So let's go back. I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Helle. It's wonderful. And I'm so glad you read one of my favorite parts of the story, where we meet Ling and Clementine, who's my favorite character. I didn't expect that, but Clementine became, the stepmom became my favorite character. We've got lots of questions, which is amazing. If you've just joined us, we are celebrating Helle, or HS Norup, at the launch of her second book, The Hungry Ghost. Thank you for joining us early in the morning, in the afternoon, or at night, depending on where you are. So we'll take the first question, which is from KC. And KC has asked, how long did it take you to plan your 100-day countdown? It was really detailed and interesting. So 100 days before the publication of The Hungry Ghost, Helle had posted pictures on Instagram, and was it on Twitter too?
On Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and then it's also on Pinterest, so that it's an easy place to find all the posts afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long did it take you?
Well, I had initially planned that I was going to plan everything out beforehand, but I didn't. I spent a couple of days to find all the photos, but I actually had maybe more like 200 photos. And then I had planned some of the posts, but I hadn't planned all of them. And I kind of planned that when the Hungry Ghost Festival month began, I was going to post about that. I had planned that I would start with nature and move on to culture. So I did spend some time, but a lot of it I did kind of day to day, or maybe planned a week in advance, because it was difficult to just do all the posts at one go. It would have been a lot to do. Yeah.
Have people told you that they found the pictures useful and things like that?
Yes, I've heard that from quite a few, and also school teachers that said if they are going to use the book, it's really going to be valuable for them, and that's also why I have everything collected in one place in a Pinterest board. So, and I think a lot of people have found it interesting to see, because so many, if you don't know Singapore well, maybe have just been there on a stopover on the way somewhere and spent 2-3 days, then what they've seen is kind of the Marina Bay area, maybe Botanic Gardens, but they don't have this impression of all the nature that's actually there, and some of the more interesting cultural things that are going on. And I think that's been wonderful to be able to share that, and people have said, wow, I never knew that, and I'm going to, if I come to Singapore, I'm definitely going to seek out some of these places, and Haw Villa, for instance, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, because Haw Villa was really popular when I was a kid, but I don't hear of school kids going to Haw Villa for excursions anymore.
No,
so
the times I've been there, there's so few people. I mean, it's not like, I've been there on mornings where I was with a couple of friends and we were the only ones there.
I wonder if it's gone, I guess maybe the grotesqueness of the statues have gone out of fashion, which is a shame. Yeah, and I remember,
maybe, yeah.
When you first sent the story over, we had lots of discussion about how Haw Villa was going to be described.
Yeah.
And I was really hopeful reading the book, thinking, okay, great, maybe a kid who's read it would maybe mention it it sounded attractive enough or intriguing enough that he or she would ask his parents to take them there. So that's right. We have another question. We're talking about nature and Singapore and the landscape in Singapore. An anonymous attendee has asked if the area directly outside the big graveyard, is it open and empty, or is it a quick transition from a busy area to the graveyard?
Oh, it depends a little bit from which side you're coming, because on the kind of the north side, there's a big road going through, but then on the other side of that, there's the whole MacRitchie Reservoir. So that's a very green area, and going north, it's very green. And kind of on the south, on the other side, it's mainly residential areas and not high rises. It's mainly kind of family houses and so on. So it's not closed off, but you do have these big roads around, and you have the Pan Island Expressway that goes on the southern side of the graveyard, and the new expressway, I don't even know what it's called, that kind of crosses completely through the graveyard, and a lot of parts of the graveyard are part of the city planning, and there will be building works going on part of it, and there is also already an MRT station below the graveyard. It's all prepared for when there's housing there. They can just open the stairs going down there. Yeah, it's. I think it's sad that, let's say by 2050, I think it'll be completely gone the way the city planning is at the moment, because it is a heritage site, I would say, and there's so much history there. And one of the things that's amazing with the guided tours there is that the tour guides they know so much about the history of the people that are buried there, and can tell these amazing stories.
Yeah, I think it would be another cemetery that we would lose. We lost Bidadari, and now we might, we're gonna lose this too. Yeah. Pip has asked if you've considered including illustrations or maps in the book, because you love maps.
I would have loved the map, but again, it's not a decision for the author. I think it's that's up to the publisher, because of course these kind of things are also costly, and for me, having a map is not entirely necessary, I think, in this story, because it doesn't really matter so much exactly how Freja moves around. And in any case, people can look at a Singapore map and kind of find out. I think it is mentioned from the very beginning that she lives close to Kemp Hock Road, and you can read in the story that she can walk up to the cemetery. So it's possible to kind of narrow down where she lives approximately. Yeah, it would have been nice to have a map, though. I like maps.
I think you loved it. When we talk about another design element, the cover, which is absolutely gorgeous. Did you have to say about that, or was it up to Anna and Pushkin?
Oh, I did have input, and I talked to Sarah early on. We talked about it had to be kind of red and gold, or yellow as it is here, right? That was kind of the overall feel. We said it just has to be these colors, and kind of having the temple on here and so on in the back. I did not have a feeling of that. I just said it would be nice to have some of the mythical creatures like the dragon and the vermilion bird on here. And then I could give feedback, and there were a couple of changes made based on my feedback. But other than that, it's purely Anna who kind of came up with the exact look of the cover. And I have a Pinterest board, not the one with 100 days, but I also have kind of a secret Pinterest board where I have a lot more things and things that are that would be spoilers for the book, and she had access to that as well. So it is also inspired by some of the photos that have been in my 100 days countdown.
It's lovely. And did Anna do the cover for the Missing Barbie Ghazi also?
Yes, she did, and that was one of the things I asked Sarah, or we agreed on very early on, that it would be nice to have Anna do the cover. When she did the Missing Barbie Ghazi, she was still employed by Pushkin, and now she's more freelanced, and so I'm really grateful that Pushkin also agreed that she could do the cover, because it also makes the books look nice together and give them the same feel.
Yeah, same feel, and they're both absolutely gorgeous. We have to talk about the editing process quite quickly, because we only have a few minutes. It's flown by. Was it like, what was the editing process like for The Hungry Ghost?
Yeah, it was a lot more difficult than the Missing Barbie Ghazi, which kind of was one draft written in half a year, then a half a year of editing on my own, and then a little bit of editing with Sarah, which was no major things. Whereas this book has been rewritten 3 times, or rewritten twice, but written completely 3 times. I think 53,000 words, but I have written at least double that amount of words to get this book written. The first draft was quite a simple ghost story, I would say, and I submitted it to Sarah, and she said, yes, I love this, it's nice and so on, but Helle, your first book is here, your next book has to be here. This is too simple. You have to expand, and you can do it. you can make this into something that is powerful and so on. She was very encouraging. She was pushing me and encouraging me at the same time, which is a wonderful way that she has, and she really is good at giving, and also this self-confidence and confidence that they can actually do what she would like. So the second draft, and then of course, in the midst of all of this, we were also moving back to Europe, and there were so many changes going on in our lives that added some time to this as well. So so the first draft, I think, was done in the early 2018. Then the Missing Babagazi also was published. So of course I had to focus on that, and then the second draft I had written by early 2019, I guess, and that was much more complicated. That was extremely complicated. I had timelines going backwards and forwards, and more characters that are in the book now, and it was a very complex story. I think it's still quite a complex story, but this was on a different level, and I discussed it with Sarah, and we agreed that maybe there was too much going on, and then the third version was kind of taking out the things that distracted from the main story, and getting that into shape, and I'm quite happy with how it has turned out. Yeah,
I think you should be very happy with how you turned out. It's an intricate story with lots of historical details. The characters have tender relationships. It deals with familial relations, friendship, about moving, identity, and then you brought in folklore and culture. So it's a really big feat bringing all these things together, and absolutely gorgeous. I think it's also a testament to Sarah's editing eye. So for those who don't know, Sarah Odendina is the editor of the Harry Potter books. So she's also edited Helle's book. So that's amazing. One last question before we go, because we only have 5 minutes. What do you miss most about living in Singapore?
That's such a difficult question. I miss so many things. Most of all my friends in Singapore, and I know a lot of them are here. So I miss you guys a lot, but I miss Singapore. I mean, one of the things I really loved was the warm evenings. I really, really miss that. We can have warm days here, of course, but these warm evenings where you stroll around in the darkness are just wonderful. Then I miss the food. I miss all the food, and I try to put as much of it into the book as possible. Originally, the Hawker Center was not just a scene, it was like an enormous chapter with all the food, and I cut down on that as well. So I really, really miss the hawker food and dim sums and so many other places. I miss this easy way of getting around. I think I miss the compactness, because in Singapore you can be anywhere in half an hour. You can kind of go from, and the public transportation system is so excellent that you don't even need a car. You can just get around, and taxis are so cheap. And here, I mean, a taxi ride costs like 10 times what it costs in Singapore. So I don't think I've been in a taxi more than once in the last 2.5 years. So yeah, many things, many things.
Yeah, we miss having you here too, but maybe in 2 years we can launch your third novel at the AFCC.
Yeah, maybe I need to write that third novel first, but
2 years, you can take 2 years to write it, and then we will have you back at the AFCC again. We can have chicken rice, go for a hike at Bukit Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we can.
yes.
Yeah, but you forget that publishing needs more than a year.
Yeah, that's true.
So I cannot have 2 years.
Maybe 3, but if you get started now, we'll make good time.
Yeah. I'll start tomorrow. I'll start. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I already started, but let's see how that goes. Yeah.
Oh, we will all be so excited, Helle. It will be we're so looking forward to your third novel. I think the second one has exceeded the expectations of the first, just as Sarah has pushed you towards. It's just so wonderful to chat with you today. And every time we're talking, we always run out of time because we have so much to say.
Yes, exactly.
But we'll carry on the conversation after. Please connect with Helle on social media. I know we have missed some of your questions, but if you send her a message on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, I'm sure she'll get to them after she starts.
I will definitely answer. Yes. No. I'll wait with writing so I can answer questions first. I'm happy to answer whatever you have of questions about the book.
Wonderful.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to Singapore Book Council for arranging the AFCC and all its amazing programs. There are more sessions available. There will be more sessions next weekend. Please sign up for them. They're at afcc.com.sg. There are also lots of book launches happening later on today. So please come back using the same link so you can continue celebrating books this weekend. Thank you so much, Helle, and thank you everyone else. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you everyone for coming.